Have you ever had those horror movies where you're like, damn, I've seen it before, but it's been a long time since I watched it. Time for a rewatch. Well, this is what this review is about today. Come along with me as I talk about my first watch of Scream. Hey, how you doing? It is I, the Terrorific Lady, otherwise known as Brandy, and welcome to Retro Horror School. And happy Friday. I've been in kind of a Scream mood this week, and I'd realized the first time that I watched Scream was back in 1997. So almost 27 years, if I am mapping correctly, because I was 15 in 1997. What's been the longest amount of time between your first movie watch? Let me know, because I'm very curious to see if you can beat my 27-year mark with Scream. Scream is notoriously very, very hard to find on streaming. I was finally able to find it by getting a free trial of MGM Plus with Amazon Prime, and that is how I watched it. So let's dive right in, sploosh, to my first watch of the movie Scream. A little bit of background about the movie Scream. Scream came out in theaters on December 20th, 1996, and it was thought that it would not do well due to the fact that it was being released around the holidays. People at the time were just like, well, holidays are supposed to be for fun, family-friendly fare, so a Scream ain't gonna do well. But through word of mouth, the movie became very, very popular, and in the future spawned 5 later films in the Scream franchise. Kevin Williamson wrote the script for Scream, and he said that much of the script was developed or influenced by a singular line of dialogue. Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative. And there are a lot of different kinds of influences in Scream. The beginning home invasion scene was inspired by a one-act play that he wrote in college about a killer, a voice on the telephone taunting a young girl. Also by a Turning Point documentary about a serial killer named Danny Rawling. He also listened to the score for the John Carpenter 1978 film Halloween while he was writing the script. Much of the script is a satirization or poking fun at the tropes that the big three, Michael, Jason, and Freddy, had established in 80s slashers. And with doing this script and this movie, people said, revitalized and breathed new life into the slasher genre, which by the time the 90s rolled around, people were calling just a little bit stale, like stale piece of bread. What's funny is that Scream was originally called Scary Movie, and there is a horror comedy called Scary Movie that makes fun of horror movies, but Kevin Williamson was convinced to change the title because the studio was too afraid that they would see Scream as more of a horror comedy, rather than a horror satire. And the search for a director took a little over 2 months before they finally settled on Wes Craven. Some directors that were considered, this list may surprise you: Sam Raimi, Robert Rodriguez, George A. Romero, and Quentin Tarantino. But all of these directors interpreted the script as a horror comedy rather than a horror satire. And then finally they went after Wes Craven. The studio was a little iffy because they said Wes had no experience with directing satires, and Wes himself was like, well, I kind of want to steer away from directing a whole bunch of, like, no, I've directed a whole bunch of gory stuff. I've had enough. I want to kind of steer away from directing movies like that. But eventually that he was convinced, and we got another Wes Craven horror. A little bit about the plot of the movie. The movie stars Neve Campbell as Sydney Prescott, and her mother was murdered almost a year ago. And near the 1-year anniversary of her mom's death, a masked killer with a knife who came to be known as Ghostface, started stalking and terrorizing Sydney and other teenagers. And that's the general plot of Scream, just a very live scraping the surface here. Now, my thoughts about it. Like, this is my second first watch. Like I mentioned earlier, I have not watched Scream since 1997. I was 15. I had the VHS tape. I damn near wore it out with how many times I watched it. And then I lost it in one of our next moves, and I just never got around to getting it again. So it was 15 when I watched it. I am 41 now. So I'm sometimes, the stuff that you like as a teenager, you watch when you're older and you're like, what the fuck was I thinking? But after watching it again, I had to say it's still a pretty solid slasher. I didn't like it as much as I did when I was 15, but I still felt it was pretty solid. The things that I still liked about it that I thought still held up is the meta slasher or the meta horror elements. So the rules to surviving a horror movie, the horror movie references that are sprinkled throughout the film, things like Randy, the character played by Jamie Kennedy, who likes horror movies, like me, talking about how if he was in a horror movie, he would be the prime suspect, and other meta horror elements. I thought the characters of Sydney and her friend Tatum were very solid. They played off of each other well. You could actually believe that they were best friends. And I also liked the character of Gail Weathers, played by Courtney Cox, and Dewey, played by David Arquette. So you had a solid cast. Now, when it comes to the killers, at the time, people were like, oh my God, there's two killers. But after going back and watching it again, the movie kind of telegraphed just a little bit about the fact that at least Billy Loomis, played by Skeet Ulrich, it kind of telegraphed that he would be the killer with his behavior. It was like with his performance, he was trying just like very hard to be just angry and menacing, whereas his counterpart, Stu, played by Matthew Lillard, he was a little bit more easy breezy, easygoing, funny. You just looked at him as the comic relief until the big reveal at the end, like, oh my God, he's the killer. And kind of a Billy, pretty shitty boyfriend. Why in the hell would you try and pressure your girlfriend to have sex with you and tell her, oh, you need to get over the death of your mom? It was almost a year ago. You need to move on. What the hell kind of boyfriend is that? So that part on top of that just like really, really annoyed me. Also, I have to give props to the opening. The opening was very, very tense. It set the stage. And for those of you who are like, what's the big deal about the opening? Drew Barrymore, huge star. She was offed in the first 5 minutes of the movie. So if she could be offed in the first 5 minutes of the movie, then it sets the tone that nobody is safe. Nobody. And to me, the opening of Scream still holds up as well and is very, very strong. So, pros, like the meta horror elements, they still hold up. Like the cast, they are very strong and play well off of one another. I ended up liking the character of Stu as a killer more than I did the character of Billy. My opinions were a little reversed whenever I was 15, and now that I'm older, I've kind of taken off the Billy Rose colored glasses and have put them aside. Like, yeah, I like Stu better now as a killer slasher type character anyway. So that's my thoughts, my rambling thoughts. I hope they were coherent and made sense, but those are my rambling thoughts on the first watch of Scream. What do you all think of Scream? Do you think it still holds up as a slasher movie? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Just what are your general thoughts on Scream? Let me know in the comments below. Class is dismissed, everybody. I will see you next time. Bye.